Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Tim Lee. I'm a research analyst at Red Cloud Securities. I'm delighted to host a Red Cloud webinar on Ecuador and the recent election results there. Today we're joined by Maria Amparo Alban, a member of the board of directors of SolGold, and by Diego Benalcazar, the president of Luminex Resources and senior VP of Lumina Gold. During today's webinar, we will provide an overview of the election results from Ecuador. Then we will have a discussion with our speakers on their insights on the results and the impact on the mining industry. And then we will take additional questions. You can type your questions into the chat box at any time, and we will get to as many as we can. Before we kick things off, first I have to discuss some fine print. During the webinar, there may be forward-looking statements made. I would like to direct listeners to forward-looking statements from SolGold, Luminex, and Lumina, outlined on their corporate presentations that can be found on the company's websites. For Red Cloud Securities, I would highlight that this webinar is for informational purposes only. It should not be considered a solicitation or a recommendation to buy or sell securities. We note that this call does not consider the particular situation or needs of individual investors. Participants should rely on their own investigation and seek their own professional advice before investing. Please see our most recent research located on the Red Cloud website for specific disclosures on SolGold, Lumina, and Luminex. To start, I will briefly set the scene for why we are hosting this event today. As you probably know, Ecuador recently held general elections. Leading presidential candidates included Andrés Arauz, Guillermo Lasso, and Yaku Perez. Arauz was the candidate for the Union for Hope party and would be considered to the political left. Lasso was the candidate for the CREO party. He is considered to be more to the political right. And Perez was the candidate for the Pachakutik Indigenous Party. In the first round of the election in February, Arauz was well ahead, with Lasso finishing second and Perez third. And however, after the runoff that was completed earlier in April, Lasso was victorious with over 52% of the popular vote. And the presidential inauguration is scheduled for later in May. In general, Lasso is considered to be more business friendly. He said he's in favor of foreign investment in mining and oil sectors in Ecuador. He has also said he's in favor of cutting tariffs on agricultural and other heavy equipment. However, he has emphasized the enforcement of environmental protection rules and involvement from indigenous communities in deciding the future of mining projects. Meanwhile, in February, the South Ecuadorian city of Cuenca held a vote in favor of limiting future large-scale mining activities in 5 nearby watershed zones. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. Ms. Maria Amparo Alban has more than 25 years experience in international trade and sustainable development, particularly environmental compliance. Maria has worked on sustainability matters in the region and was a negotiator in the free trade agreement negotiation between Ecuador and the United States on environmental matters. Maria has served as an advisor to Ecuador's trade ministers, Ministry of Environment, has consulted to United Nations Environmental Program, among others, and was the founding partner of the Inter-American Institute for Justice and Sustainability. She is a lawyer by background and has taught environmental law, international trade negotiation, and sustainable development for over a period of over 20 years. Maria's Ecuadorian experience and knowledge will provide exceptional value to the SolGold board during permitting and fiscal agreement negotiations in Ecuador. And we also have Mr. Diego Benalcazar. He has more than 30 years of experience in management, development, exploration, and production of operations in the metallic and industrial mining industry, evaluation of mining properties, and acquisitions of projects throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. He is currently president of Luminex Resources and senior vice president of Lumina Gold Corp. He has vast experience in precious metals and industrial raw materials. He has been president and member of the board of directors of the Ecuadorian Chamber of Mines. Throughout his career, he has installed more than a dozen industrial mineral processing plants in Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and in Central America. He has held senior leadership and management positions with several international mining companies, such as Homestake International Minerals, Pan Continental Mining, and the U.S. subsidiary of the Belgian company Union Minière. He was also general director of several subsidiaries of Holcim, of Switzerland, in Venezuela, in Colombia, La Cemento, National Ecuador, and Caracom Cement in Dominica. Mr. Benalcazar has a BA in geology from North Carolina State, a diploma in physical anthropology, and has completed the executive MBA program at Harvard Business School. In addition, he has a postgraduate studies at the London School of Economics. So Maria and Diego, thank you both for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Dan.
To lead off the discussion, perhaps it'd be good to get a bit of background on politics and mining in Ecuador over the past 10 to 15 years. Obviously, Rafael Correa came into being president in 2007, pulled the government a bit to the left. He was followed by his former vice president, and now we have a new election. How had the political views of these leaders impacted the mining industry in Ecuador over the past 15 years or so? Perhaps we'll start with Maria.
Thank you, Tim. Well, it's good to get a little bit of background for what has been happening in Ecuador in the last, I would say, over a decade or so. When Rafael Correa, the former president, came into office, Ecuador had a big shift to the left, and that implied some strong views toward investment, and especially FDI, foreign direct investment. And I would say that probably what was more determinant was that issuing in 2010 a mining law, a mining act to regulate the industry. That piece of legislation went through several revisions throughout the next years, but finally came, I would say, into a shape and form that could be attractive somehow to the international industry, to the industry itself. So I think that most of the vision from that government has not been changed yet in the last 4 years with President Moreno, and remains to be, I would say, to be tackled in terms of giving or sending the right signals to the market in terms of rule of law and legal security to contracts. Ecuador went through several arbitration processes through that period. So I think that remains an important task for the next government. And I know that President Lasso is well aligned with the rule of law and knows how it operates in the international arena. So I think that is something that the government will be looking at for the next years. And still, I should say, the legacy from former governments remain built within our institutional capacities and regulator bodies that should be looked again to make it more efficient and probably to create more dynamism for the industry. Not only this one, but others as well. Yeah.
Great. And Diego, do you have any insights as well on politics and your experience over the past years?
Well, by having worked in the region, and especially in Ecuador, for the past 30 plus years, the evolution of the industry in Ecuador has been quite slow. We, as a country, do not have the mining experience. It's not in the DNA of the general public, and it's been really a learning process for the different governments since the previous law that was mentioned by Maria Amparo. Nevertheless, a decade and a half before the Correa government, most of the actual projects that are now in production and will be in production in the future were already discovered. But there was not the right arena or conditions to proceed, and everything was stopped at the beginning of the government of Rafael Correa, with no true understanding of the industry. And at the beginning, they thought that they should clean the cadastral system and get rid of many concessions that were in the hands of mom and pops, people that were not able to invest. And this was true to a certain extent, but it went beyond the intention to really stop the interest of the markets to invest into Ecuador. And Ecuador lost a lot of competitiveness, and investment capitals were not coming to Ecuador because they, there was not a serious response to what an investor could have here, and there were better destinations. And in my opinion, at the end of the Correa period, they realized that mining is key to sustain the economy and to be an integral part of the GDP. And they just switched the approach with a concept of inviting investment through a tender process. This was fabulous because by doing that, which in my opinion was quite clear and transparent, the government, the last period of the government of Correa, was able to invite and host more than 15 mining companies of high international standard. And the commitments towards investment through that exercise were substantial enough that now we are looking at the results. In the past 2 to 3 years, mining investment has been number one among all the other industries for Ecuador. And with all the problems we're going to discuss, I think we have a new scenario for the investment or venture and actually CapEx investment possibilities in Ecuador.
Great. And then now, with the election results, how do you see the presidential election results impacting mining and mineral exploration in Ecuador? What are your expectations now from President-elect Lasso?
Okay, is it me?
Go
Okay.
ahead, Maria.
Thanks.
Sure thing.
Environmental governance momentum, I would say that is being created, and some claims. So I think that he has incorporated into his plans that claim, I would say, in terms of creating or providing for higher standards for the industry, committing to responsible mining in what it relates to social and environmental standards, and of course those governance factors that relates to participation and consultation within the territories. We have been seeing that he has incorporated, he has met, and probably even he committed with some environmental NGOs and other civil society groups to push forward this agenda, to take into account what the qualities that the different communities are saying about mining. And I think that is a good sign. I think that is a new type of I would say, industry that he is wanting to create, one that incorporates those visions into the decision-making process. We have been seeing claims from those groups that have been left behind in the policy-making process or in the discussion within the territories. And he's willing, and from what I've heard and know from his advisors, he's willing to incorporate that factor. He creating more governance and interacting with those interested groups and stakeholders that are key to any industry, and are key, of course, to the society and the capacity of the government to push forward any industry. So that is something that I receive with interest, and I think that will be very positive for the industry to have a government that joins an industry in such endeavor to incorporate society, I would say, communities and this need for further participation, because that works and tackles one of the factors that have been negative lately, which is the lack of transparency of governmental policies, as these communities see. So I would say that providing for transparency, for wider participation and consultation processes within the territories will be key for the industry to go forward and to push and to carry on the plans. And I know that the government is willing to do that. And I think in a very positive way for the industry to be committed here with a new standard. I think I take that as a positive note for the next government and the plans that the government has for the industry.
Great. And what are your thoughts, Diego?
Well, no doubt, mining is important for the development of Ecuador, and although during the political campaign, Guillermo Lasso generated a more popular, I would say, speech, providing space for the opinions of NGOs and even the phenomena of southern Ecuador. His actual speech is turning to a pro-business, positive but cautious model. He was very clear, stating publicly that Ecuador does not have the luxury to keep the natural resources underground. These resources must be exploited and developed, but under the environmental and social statements that are required. I think Maria Paro well exposed that this is going to be an example of a responsible type of government. They have to continue really fine-tuning the regulations and also selecting the right and appropriate actors. For that matter, I think we have an opportunity. It's not going to be a transformation that takes only months. It may take a couple of years to position a government plan for mining. It's hard for them to have drafted even a mining plan, because they needed to navigate for elections and win. Now, if negotiations come with the IMF, we're going to have to sustain the economy, and one of the main ingredients in that process is going to be to keep developing the mining sector.
Great. And then stepping in a little different direction here, we had the Cuenca vote as well. How do you see the Cuenca vote impacting the industry, particularly obviously in the southern part of Ecuador?
Well, that is an important question, Tim, because it calls upon a process that has been happening here in Ecuador, and being very bluntly, does not relate to those communities solely, but that relates to a perception. I would say a general perception on the government and the capacity of the government to take that challenge ahead. And I would say specifically that those consultations, and not only those as the referendum in southern regions, Cuenca, but all those even legal challenges before the constitutional court that are happening, are a symptom of distrust on controlling, monitoring properly. So that is what has been happening in this phenomena. As people have been looking at these institutions that have been weakening through the last years, and they question their capacity to take properly regulations forward. So I think that it's important to say that is connected to those consultations, because if the government is capable of providing stronger institutions, stronger regulator bodies, probably better provisions to safeguard environment, social conditions, and so on, that will gain trust. And those consultations that refer to the electoral power, the electoral office, that such as referendums in different communities, will be diminished because they respond to a demand. So it's important to understand why are they happening, and what is the cause can help us to determine what can we do about it. So if the government commits strongly, as I think should be doing, if the government wants to push this industry forward, to invest in capacity, to fund properly this agency, environmental agencies and other agencies that relate to different permits and the control and monitoring capacities of the state, of the government at different levels, we should see a decrease in this referendums and consultations with the electoral power, with the electoral office. So I think that is important to understand. This is happening because we create an expectation that was not accompanied, was not joined by creating capacity and strengthening capacity from the governmental side in getting in funding better and providing better resources to those institutions in charge of those tasks. So that is something that I think is being looked at, and I hope will be taken care in the next years. Nevertheless, I would say that these consultations do create an expectation of self-determination and autonomy for some communities, but that have not been taken into account within the different developmental plans, such as mining. So I think that this also relates to the kind of democracy that is being built and discussed lately, how participation is a key role now to keep democracy strong, and transparency is a key factor, and of course empowering communities as well. So I know that the president has been committed by those appealing into this, and I hope that this could be changed. This situation could be changed into more trust to the governmental capacity to take these challenges ahead and do the right thing.
Great. And Diego, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Tim, I think not only the Correa government, but this Moreno period, they are both in debt of not having produced, the regulation corresponding to, previous consultation law. And without that mechanism, the other resources for the communities to speak up and pass their opinion or negotiate even, the possibility or the feasibility of a project going into production. The only way to go was the Constitutional Court. And this is precisely a phenomenon that builds up to the extent that people that are not part of the action become really forces against mining, especially when you're close to a major city or in water hedges. This is the case of southern Ecuador. Now, if by producing a law, a new I would say non-binding, because this is something that really worries everybody, consultation law, and in my understanding, binding is not possible. It's illegal. It's not constitutional. It only needs to be drafted in the sense that you give enough information ahead of time to the communities and try to incorporate their needs into such projects. For that matter, if we take into account the Constitutional Court has dealt with more than 5 cases in the past 2-3 years, and only one was actually taken to the referendum stage. The other one were discarded due to many conditions, but especially we think it's because it'll be anti-development of the country. Situations like the Cuenca case were very, very special. And one thing that we have to understand, the court was extremely clear, saying that the referendum decision cannot affect retroactively rights that were provided. And in that sense, what I think is going to happen with the new law that should be passed by Congress or Assembly is that any new concession, if and only if the cadastral systems gets reopened, and it shouldn't be open before having this law in place, because it's shooting at your foot. Then you have to separate the actual projects, concession holders, concessions and companies that have done already the process according to the statements of the actual law, and the possible new projects that will have to go run their previous consultation even before early exploration.
Great. Thank you. And I guess one follow-up question here. We have quite a few questions coming in from the audience. And I guess one thing to kind of build on, there's quite a few.
Well, I think as every time in politics, you will need to negotiate. And these negotiations are already taking place within our legislative power in the National Assembly, our Congress. And I think that is positive that some of the major blocs, because nobody has a majority, no party has a majority, so they're obliged, they have to negotiate, and the government has to negotiate their plans. I think that there are main agreements on the fundamental issues, such as the government that the government should be pushing forward policy to attract investment and to create jobs, because Ecuador is going through already through a very deep fiscal crisis when the pandemic came into place. So we are suffering the effects of an aggravated crisis, economic and financial crisis in the country. So there is some sort of core agreement on how to tackle, and that goes through first vaccination processes, and that is of course something that the government should take upon. Has offered 9 million vaccines in the first 100 days of being in office. So that is something that relates strongly to the economic recovery. And I think there's many agreements already in that regard. So a second part, I would say that we'll have to negotiate some developmental plans. And I think the mining industry is at the center front of that discussion in the Congress, since some of those groups that have an important number of legislators have made statements toward mining industry and the need for it to incorporate wider consultation processes, and of course, as Diego was mentioning, to have a clear legislation that regulates how these processes will be undertaken. So that is at the front of the discussion. Also, open pit mining has been mentioned within those discussions. If the country will like to avoid those sort of projects. And of course, this is a very technical issue taken into a political discussion, so it does not translate properly and do not have the adequate background. But those are the claims that have been, or the proposals that have been throughout the discussions. And on top of that, the water issue. And I should say that this is probably one of the most sensitive issues, as Diego was mentioning, water hedges or mining projects near water hedges. In the Ecuadorian Andes the water and it is a very important issue, because we are at the highlands and we see how water is being, I would say, it's easy to understand the process of the water cycle. And we have seen the glaciers in our snow mountains retreat year by year, decade by decade. And now with the aggravated climate crisis has become a very sensitive issue for communities. So this is important now in our political agenda, has scaled up to be a discussion, a political discussion, a very important discussion. So that will be also how to avoid affecting water sources and water hedges, and how to regulate mining industry in a way that we can assure population, communities nearby that this resource and of course the ecosystem and all the interactions will be taken care. And that is something that the government, I would say, will be discussing with the government, with the legislature and their different blocks as part of the negotiation for the industry regulation.
Great.
So Tim, first phase for the government is to negotiate the fiscal reforms. And with no doubt, this is going to take a good time of the following 2 years. And by default, some of these issues will be dealt with, but in particular, I think it's going to take a little time. In the fiscal reforms, in order to comply with the plans of the economic recuperation, a lot of one of the major statements is doubling the production of oil. Yeah, and by the way, really advancing the most important mining projects. So I think that this is an evolution to the way of the assembly people or congressmen will have to think to start with. Now, there is a divide. The indigenous decision party decides to go which way. This is something we don't know yet. It's all based on accumulation of minorities to become majority. And then again, the president would have some veto power if something really extreme comes to place. So, you know, I see that we're going to have to comply with some statements of the International Monetary Fund to start. These will be taken as a product to the assembly to treat and dealt with and try to approve. And then the other issues, but water. Water is a very, very delicate issue that when the time comes, as Maria Amparo is saying, you know, we have to be paying a lot of attention.
Great. Great. All right, thank you. We'll also have a few questions from the audience. Just a reminder to everyone online, you can type your questions into the chat box at any time. We've actually had quite a few already, and we'll get to as many as we can. I guess one question that was kind of submitted ahead of time, and obviously, you know, the government hasn't even come into power yet, but do you know to what extent the new government has any concrete plans for mining companies going forward?
I don't think that the government or the campaign have made specific comments on that. From what I read, they have met on several occasions with the industry and have assured that they will be respecting the rule of law, provide wider legal security to the operations, and that. In terms of the mining policy itself, if they have formulated something specific, I have not been able to tackle that. I have not been able to read specific plans. They, of course, and as Diego mentioned, which is important, will be guided by the agreement with the International Monetary Fund. That is something that they are binded by, and that, of course, and the agreement itself provides some light into what they should be doing in terms of the industry. So that is a good hint, and I think they will be very diligent in following upon those commitments made previously. I should say that they are also relying upon inviting new investment to the country. And I think that they are probably also thinking about the industry. And I think that opening the mining cadastre is not something that they have in mind immediately, because as Diego was mentioning, it is impossible to go forward without previously defining some conditions for operations, not only in terms of consultation law or that piece of legislation that is missing, but also in terms of capacity, of institutional capacity, which I just mentioned, that needs to be reinforced to address properly what these projects need to have in different stages of the projects they go through. So I think those two things have to be solved yet before inviting or new investment or opening the mining cadastre to appeal for that investment. So I think they have some days left to get in office. I'm sure they are working on those plans and projects to be announced soon. And I don't think that they have provided yet more specifics on how will they be dealing with the industry.
Sure. And Diego, what are your thoughts?
We must be guided by their good intentions. As for now, ministers haven't been named. They're just going to start, I believe, next Monday to release the names of the future ministers. We are hoping to have the right people, especially at the energy and mines area and the environmental, because permitting it's a problem in Ecuador. in order to advance projects, you need to really expedite environmental permits, licenses, blah, blah, blah. And this is something that even if you have the right policies, you can obtain the permits. I mean, you can be here too long. But they're aiming for that for sure. They're choosing, as our understanding is, through meeting with the party, just on the basis of trying to help. Is that they are, of course, they don't have a plan, an integral plan. They need to learn. They need to sit with the right people and discuss. It's important to know that going back to the cadastral system, it could really erode Lazo's popularity if it's not well administered. But in my opinion, it's not truly a major need to open the cadastral system. Most of the country, I would say close to 80% of the ground that is prospectable or subject to exploration has been already staken. So, and this is a message to investors. I think the opportunities in Ecuador is about the already established concessions and the projects that do require funds to keep going. It's not that important to reopen the cadastral system for projects, exports with no control, blah, blah, blah. So is our responsibility, the companies locally and the major actors in the industry, to try to help them structure the right set of ideas. I'm sure the FMI is going to ask for a review of the mining law. Even we know that in most developing countries, the drafts of the mining laws are pretty much a copy paste of what has worked in other countries. We don't know that part.
Right. Great. And we touched a little bit on COVID-19 earlier. How do you see the results of this election impacting the country's COVID-19 response? Do you think the incoming government will have changes? And then obviously it's impacted the economy. How do you see the approach to economic recovery being different?
From what I've been hearing recently, I think that the government is willing to enforce a different approach towards a vaccination process, incorporating the private sector, private facilities, hospitals, and some others into the vaccination process to make it wider as possible and to be able to comply with the offer to have 9 million vaccinated in the first 100 days, which is very, for what we have been seeing in the terms of the rate of vaccination process in Ecuador is very ambitious. So that is something that I think we see a shift towards that, the capability of the government to invite and to create alliances, as it has happened in other countries, with private sector to expand the capacity for the vaccination process to take place. I expect that to be happening, and I think that is within the plans of the vice president. Is doctor has been taking care of this, the elected vice president, and I know that there are some conversations going regarding that. So if that is the case, and the private sector is able to help the government to speed up the vaccination process, I think that the economic recovery will be something feasible for the next year, starting probably the next second semester. That this is something that we can see. So vaccination process is a key for the economic recovery at this point. So these alliances and the capacity of the government to appeal to the private sector to collaborate with this, I think is crucial, and I think is in the right direction, and from what I've heard is thinking about it.
It's a real challenge to vaccinate 90,000 people per day to reach 9 million vaccinated people in 100 days. Logistically and control. Not to count if we obtain that many, that number of vaccines in time. But the intention is there. I think, there's this is well thought by the government, and it didn't start last week. It's important for the return of all the industries and the provision of labor. It's important to continue with the exports. Ecuador is about raw materials and agriculture, very, very intense in exports in shrimp and banana and everything that's labor intensive. So it's a must for us to try to vaccinate, if not the 9 million, half of it in 100 days. Contrary to other sectors, most of the strategic sectors have continued working, but in other cases, no. So yeah, I would agree with Maria Amparo. This is number one priority for the government.
Great. And we've had a few questions also related to kind of specifics about projects or regions within Ecuador. And I'd kind of back that up a bit, and obviously with the Cuenca vote, give us a bit of a different take here, but give us a bit of your thoughts on the regions within Ecuador. Are there areas that are a bit more friendly for the, open, I should say, to the mining industry? And yeah, I guess, what is your take on regional aspects to this?
Well, the Cuenca voting created this trend, and I think that it relates to, as we should see it, mostly sensitive areas where communities are perceiving that the impact will be bigger. So for companies as Solgo, for instance, it will not be a problem because the major projects are not located near those locations, and that is important to say. There's also important to say that the definition of sensitive areas for the mining project is something that will be reviewed in this government to be able to define more specifically which areas should be taken care of and probably create some sort of protection. That is something that's not happened, and there are some obscurities in the law and the processes. So that is create that anxiety that we see developing through this voting. So I think that is something to be said. Some projects are closer to those areas, some are not. And the capacity not only of the projects to create assurances of environmental protection and creating some feasibility for the ecosystem, specifically water sources and water hedges to be protected, is key on how those projects will advance in the next stages. Some projects are near those locations where these sensitivities are higher, and some are not. So not all projects are affected by that sensitivity. Nevertheless, everyone, and I think this is an issue that the government should be taking it seriously. There is the need to look out for the whole entire area of concessions already in place, and take a deep look into which areas already concession is even so are touching upon sensitive areas, perceptions, and communities being preoccupied on how this projects might affect water provision, for instance, as some other environmental systems.
So Ecuador has more than 30% of tangible areas, areas with national parks and the protected forest, where you're not allowed to do any exploration or mining. These are sensitive areas to be close to. And if that's the case, you need a special approach in your behavior. There are areas that are socially difficult, where you have indigenous communities, for instance, and you need this special approach in order to incorporate yourself into that cosmovision, and for them also to find opportunities as the project develops. But in terms of the mining potential, you have corridors of mineralization or districts in Ecuador that do have mining presence since hundreds of years ago. And some of those, for instance, the Portobello zone, Zaruma Portobello, pre-colonial, where you're not going to have these type of problems. There's a lot of knowledge about it. New areas where you can find potential, but no one was there before. It's about the social part. And basically, we have these corridors of potential mineralization well defined. So it's also important to really have an X-ray of the situation in those particular areas, to have the government, model the treatment you have to take care of on that particular scenario. Companies have already adapted to that locally. I think everybody here that has a project that is potential is going beyond early exploration has done a good job. And there's fantastic examples of that, of such responsible development among the major companies in Ecuador already. We have enough results that can be fed to the regulator. Basically, what we need is a more serious type of regulator, a just-in-time action, and this is going to help a lot.
Great. And I guess one other question here, Maria, you had mentioned earlier that the previous government had put in place, mining laws for the country. We did have a question: is it necessary to have new mining laws, or would you say that the current laws are, seem to be good, proper, and the industry should work within that framework?
I wouldn't say that the country needs to revise or reform the current law. I think the country needs to create additional tools to encourage investment, given the conditions created by the current legislation. Of course, investment requires some warranties for operation. So bilateral investment agreements is something that should be discussed if the government is really trying to encourage investment in the country. Those we know that have gone through a process, very negative process in the last year. So that is one of the things I think that should come with examining the conditions provided by the legislation. And the other one, I would say, that does not relate directly with the law, but with the standards, the operating standards. I would say that it's better to incorporate international standards into the operation. You see, we have been discussing different sectors, from the academia, from institutions and organizations, some standards that the industry is needing. For instance, the one proposed by the International Extractive Industry Transparency Standard, the IETI, is something that was welcomed by civil society groups and organizations here, and they're actively discussing how to make it a national standard. The government has entered into this compromise, so that is something that we should be looking at. We should be also looking at, as I mentioned, performance standards coming from an IFC, for instance. When I look at the projects and I see the different studies, environmental impact assessment studies, I don't see many of the performance standards that are incorporated in the IFC clauses. And I think that we should take into account what is being already demanded by the international financial, let's say, world for financing any project, especially mining projects, and take those as standards and bring them here. That will assure many interested parties and stakeholders that we are up to the highest standard, because our legislation needs revision in terms of environmental standards. The mining law, I think as it is, probably could have some tweaks, and the calibration for incentives could vary through the years to come. But I would say that what is needed is to acquire standards and to assure that those standards will be incorporated as a regular practice for the industry. And of course, while we find out how to have and build stronger institutions for regulation. So I would appeal to voluntary standards, to the compromise, and to the capacity of the industry to take upon the ESG compromises internationally and make them something that they will observe rigorously here in Ecuador.
So we can work well with the actual mining law. It's not the perfect document. Some tweaks to the regulatory code would be needed, so you don't have to deal with the assembly drafting a new proposal, and that's very, very dangerous. Under the actual conditions of where you don't have a unified trend of thought, and you have lots of the pseudo-ecologist the minds running some ideas here and there. If you open these for the general opinion, it's going to be worse than medicine. In any case, I would say, for instance, the rules that control the tender processes and how to report the expenses, minor things like that are not clear, that are only based on terms of references, but that are not described at the level of the law, could be enforced a little better at the regulatory code. So hopefully we don't have to go through a process of mining law review. I mean, if that happens, it should be an open door type exercise. Most of the times, a law is passed by the incorporation of 4 or 5 individuals with some ideas, and the industry wasn't able to really have an opinion. But it's not a bad document. We can work with it, and we've developed projects with it.
Sure. And kind of following up on our regional discussion, we did have a question from the audience. What are your thoughts about the Quito Metropolitan District consultation that is coming up soon?
Well, I think it's a difficult, situation for the mining industry if Quito metropolitan area decides to ban mining industry as it is proposed. Not because we have projects of great relevance within the metropolitan area, it's because it calls upon a possibility, and it diminishes and undermines the capacity of the central government, to regulate the industry, and sends, I would say, a message that the way our legal system is structured, it doesn't work, and we need to appeal to the electoral office to resolve matters of government. So the message is I think, for the system itself, for the institutional system and the regulatory system, is a very bad one. Not because of the projects here, but because it will create an effect. So every time we do not comply, we do not agree with the government in terms of policies and some industries, we will call upon this capacity to call for a local referendum, and create a different condition for our territory. So that will, I think, undermine in time the capacity of any government to rule, to implement and to carry out on the promises. So I think, on the contrary to what people think that is part of our democracy, this, I think, does not resolve the core elements of the demand for more transparent and more participation in democracy, because this calls upon the intrusion of a different office of the state or of the government, and undermines the capacity of the government to solve the problems that constitutionally is obliged to.
Great.
Who in this world would claim a concession within a metropolitan area? That's to start with. And, under the local circumstances, for a, very minor intention of exploring, the serious industries can be affected. And I don't have much more to say in the terms of the legality, but the precedent could be truly harmful for the industry. And I don't think anyone expects to have a win-win situation when discussing, doing mining within the first of all, the very intangible area of the north-occidental part of Quito, which is just pretty much one of the most biodiverse areas in the world. And also it's within the limits of the metropolitan area of Quito. So that is one more case that, is hard to fight. It's hard to fight.
Can I follow up closely? Can we follow up on that? I think that in terms of what institutionally Ecuador has already in terms of environmental protection regulations and the courts and the system, we already have the way to resolve those problems by enforcing our current legislation and not appealing to the office. So if an area is very sensitive in terms of ecosystem services, that should be protected. But the way to do it is going through the executive branch or going up, or maybe presenting or appealing to the justice to protect. That is also a way our system provides. But when you appeal to the electoral office, is a different game. So that sends a complicated game. And I agree, it is a sensitive area to be protected, but there are ways to do it.
Great. All right, great. Well, thank you. Our time is coming to a close here. We've had a very good discussion, and I'd like to thank you very much, Maria and Diego, for your time and insights today. And thank you to the audience for your participation today. We had a lot of questions. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but hopefully you found this as worthwhile as I did. And we welcome you to continue with our webinar series here with Red Cloud. And thank you again for your time today.